Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 700 Club. Honor God or obey his employer? That choice was a no-brainer for postman Gerald Goff. He quit work and sued the Postal Service for not letting him observe the Sabbath.
And now the Supreme Court has ruled unanimously in Goff's favor, issuing one of the strongest decisions on religious freedom in 40 years. Abigail Robertson brings us the details from Washington.
When mailman Gerald Goff started working for the Postal Service, he didn't have to work Sundays. But that changed in 2013 when the service started to deliver packages 7 days a week.
I was raised in a Christian family. There was no question about, working on Sunday. We always refrained from working on the Lord's Day.
At first, Goff found workarounds like doing extra work during the week and then transferring to a rural location that didn't do Sunday deliveries. But eventually the workaround stopped working, and when he couldn't find coverage for his Sunday shifts, he'd get in trouble for not showing up. In 2019, Goff quit and sued the Postal Service for not letting him observe the Sabbath.
I said, I feel like you're backing me into a corner, asking me to choose if I'm going to honor God or am I going to obey you as my authority, and my employer. I said, I mean no disrespect to you as my employer, but I have to choose God.
Goff's lawyers argued religious accommodations in the workplace need to be observed.
There's no reason religious workers should receive lesser protection than those covered by other accommodation statutes.
Part of the case hinged on an interpretation of an undue hardship of an employer. A 1977 Supreme Court ruling known as Hardison established that employers don't have to meet religious accommodations if there is even a minimal burden on the business. The Biden administration argued that Goff's absences created that hardship for the Postal Service.
His absences created direct, concrete burdens on other carriers who had to stay on their shifts longer to get the mail delivered. That caused problems with the timely delivery of mail, and it actually produced employee retention problems, with one carrier quitting and another carrier transferring and another carrier filing a union grievance.
According to the opinion, Goff sued under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, asserting that USPS could have accommodated his Sunday Sabbath practice without undue hardship on the conduct of USPS's business. A lower court ruled that Goff's request for Sundays off created a burden for coworkers and his workplace. But this week, the Supreme Court corrected that ruling, unanimously holding that Title VII requires an employer that denies a religious accommodation to show that the burden of granting an accommodation would result in substantial increased costs in relation to the conduct of its particular business.
We are a nation where not just all employers, but particularly government employers, do have to be respectful of someone's religious beliefs and practice, and that might mean having to work around schedules for someone who observes a Sunday Sabbath.
Goff told CBN News a few months ago he can't change what happened to him in the past, but he's hoping this ruling protects religious freedom for other Americans going forward. Reporting from Washington, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thank you, Abby. And other news from the Supreme Court, yesterday's ruling against affirmative action in college admissions. George Thomas has that story from the CBN newsroom. George?
Thank you, Andrew. Conservatives are praising the decision, which restricts the role race can play in getting into universities and colleges. But President Biden is slamming it and calling on admissions officers around the country to find other ways to prioritize diversity on their campuses. CBN's Jenna Browder has more from Washington.
After more than 40 years, it's the end of an era in American law and life. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court has rolled back affirmative action in higher education.
These opinions reestablish the founding principles of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which clearly forbids treating Americans differently by race.
The group bringing the case, arguing affirmative action policies at Harvard and the University of North Carolina used racial preferences to favor some, while discriminating against others, often Asian Americans. Joined by the High Court's 5 other conservatives, Chief Justice John Roberts writing the policies at these 2 schools unavoidably employ race in a negative manner and involve racial stereotyping. Adding, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. And warning, the student must be treated based on his or her experiences as an individual, not on the basis of race. In a sharp dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor declaring the devastating impact of this decision cannot be overstated. Ignoring racial inequality will not make it disappear. President Biden also criticizing the decision.
Discrimination still exists in America. Today's decision does not change that. It's a simple fact.
And when asked about the High Court's legitimacy,
this is not a normal court.
Former President Trump disagreeing on Truth Social, calling the ruling a great day for America. And today marks the last day of the High Court's term, with more big decisions expected on President Biden's student loan forgiveness program and a case involving a Christian graphic artist from Colorado who wants to design wedding websites but objects to making them for same-sex couples. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Thank you, Jenna. Turning to the Middle East, Israeli leaders recently reached out to their Palestinian counterparts ahead of a Muslim observance, wishing them happy holidays. And with that greeting, they called on the Palestinian Authority to combat rising terrorism and violence. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl brings us that story from Jerusalem.
The holiday outreach followed a surprise attack when Palestinian terrorists launched 2 rockets from Jenin for the first time in 18 years, a claim later refuted by Hamas. Although the rockets fell short of their target, it's just the latest example of violence in the northern West Bank, part of the area the Bible calls Judea and Samaria. During a visit to northern Samaria, Likud Knesset member Danny Danon said the current situation makes Israel look weak to its enemies and that there must be a move to crush the terrorist infrastructure before it's too late.
Residents of the area of Samaria are going through a difficult time with relentless terror attacks by Palestinian terrorists. There's no choice. We must react with a military operation in order to strike the terror cells.
While standing next to the widow of Meir Tamari, a terror victim buried on his 32nd birthday, Danon assured the crowd of his belief that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will respond.
I hope that very soon we'll see the IDF operating inside the villages. We'll see these checkpoints return to the place where they murdered a Jew at the hands of a Palestinian that still hasn't been caught. And this way, we can relay a very clear message of who is the landlord here in the land of Israel.
Israeli President Isaac Herzog spoke with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas ahead of the upcoming Muslim Feast of the Sacrifice that marks Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Ishmael, not Isaac. The holiday message included a desire for cooperation, urging PA leaders to step up and fight terrorism.
There's been basically a kind of terrorist infestation in the northern West Bank, which is mostly members of Palestinian Islamic Jihad and others from Hamas and disgruntled members of the Fatah.
Middle East analyst Seth Frantzman says this current wave is made up of men mostly born some 20 years ago following the Second Intifada. Their anger is bolstered by a huge supply of weapons flooding the area, many likely paid for and smuggled in by Iran.
You have basically all the bad elements you don't want in one place.
He adds, while this isn't new to Israel, the weakness and breakdown of the PA presents a unique problem.
It always faces terrorist groups. But the presence of large numbers of weapons in Jenin and the failure of the Palestinian Authority, which is a U.S. and Western-backed institution, to control Jenin, which is underneath its own territory, is the main contributing factor. Not having authorities control the city, not having police or anyone there, allows the armed men to do whatever they want.
For at least a year, Israel has used armed raids to root out terrorists, but it hasn't proved to be enough.
I think the Palestinian Authority has to be able to control most of its cities better. That means I think the United States and others that deal with the Palestinian Authority need to take this much more seriously.
Frantzman says the focus should be to take away the guns, stop the smuggling, and prosecute those trading in illegal firearms. That could allow Israel to then precisely target those behind the attacks. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Julie. The clarion call to continue praying for the peace of Jerusalem continues, Terry.